when did I discover death metal? I think I was probably 14. So that must be 89, 89. Yeah, probably around when I was 14, because that was at the time, I remember going to a basement here in this city where I live now, and I was buying Fatal Portrait with King Diamond and Possessed Seven Churches. So Possessed Seven Churches was my first really extreme record. And I believe I was 14. At that time, I was already listening to classic heavy. I started listening to that when I was 10 or something, because one of my sister, her boyfriend, he had a huge collection of classic heavy metal. So I very quickly, in a young age, got totally sucked into that. But when it came to the more extreme music like death metal, I think I was 14.
I think I was 13. And that was in 1991. Yeah, it was stuff like Death, Ill Disposed, yeah, Morbid Angel, stuff like that.
I discovered the extremer form of metal, I would say, during mid-80s. I was listening to Iron Maiden, Judas Priest, Scorpion, stuff like that when I was like 11, 12 years old. I think the first album I ever bought was not because of the band, it was because of the cover, and that was Iron Maiden Killers. So I think that came out 82 or 81. And that's, and then the story continues with, getting more into the extremer stuff like, let's say Metallica, Slayer, the first stuff that came out from the thrash wave in the early 80s, mid 80s, I would say. And then from then on, it was like soaking in everything that was more extreme than Slayer. Back then it was like Slayer was the ultimate extreme metal band, I would say. And then, we discovered bands like Celtic Frost, also like tape-traded stuff, like from Florida first time, then Mantas came out. And that was the beginning of like the more extreme stuff. The first death metal release I bought was probably Possessed Seven Churches, if that's considered death metal. A lot of people say it's thrash, between the border thrash to death metal, but they had a song, of course, called death metal. So I guess for a lot of people, this album marks the point where death metal started. But then, of course, Death, Scream Bloody Gore was pretty much an album that grabbed me by the balls, I would say. And that was 87, I think. So, yeah, 86, 87. Death, Scream Bloody Gore, I would say.
The first one I bought was actually Ill Disposed. I think, because I didn't really buy much back then. So I think I think this was in I don't remember, in the 90s. It could be also some of the Death records on cassette tape.
Oh yeah, totally. I still miss those days with tape trading. I had a band called Dominus, which was death metal, and I believe we started around 1990, and our first demo came out 1 year or two after that. And there was a lot of tape trading, especially with Swedish bands. I remember tape trading with Edge of Sanity, Dan Svaner, and a lot of tape trading. I still miss those days, and taking the train to the small countryside cities where they had those underground shows, and it was all about being on the parking lot and tape trading and trading flyers and just being the nerds that we truly are. So yeah, I still miss those days, and I think it's nice to see now that the tapes are getting back to the market. It gives lovely memories.
Our first inspiration, or my first inspiration, came from exactly that type of music. Of course, Slayer was always a big influence from the first time I heard them. But also then, of course, the starting wave of death metal, which wasn't actually called death metal back then, was more the extremer thrash versions like Dark Angel, Possessed, Celtic Frost, also Slaughter from Canada, Sacrifice, stuff like that. But those albums from the mid-80s, I would say, is like a big influence on stuff we did in the first place.
The first death metal show I was at, that's been in Copenhagen. I think that was with Danish Conqueror, actually. Yeah.
Me too.
Well, the reason for forming Dominus back in the days, my love for classic heavy metal came very early, like when I was 10 years old. So that was a lot of listening to Dio and Iron Maiden and Black Sabbath and those kind of bands. Of course, Metallica and such. Also, listening to Megadeth and Anthrax and Slayer, and it just looked like a lot of fun when you were watching those videotapes with those kind of bands. It looks like a lot of fun, and besides really loving the music style, what could top that than just trying to form your own band? And when I finally got together with some of the members, and we decided to go more in a direction of playing death metal instead of playing the classic heavy stuff. And that was because suddenly the whole, death metal scene exploded with a lot of those classic bands that we all know from Sweden and also, of course, from America. So a lot of inspiration from Grewe and Entombed and Dismember, early Benediction. I remember when Harmony Corruption came with Napalm Death, that was really something special. Deicide, when their debut album was released, Level in Creation, The Ten Commandments, those kind of bands definitely made the impact on Dominus when we were about to form and write those demos and later the records.
Well, our goals with the band was actually, as we came from a very countryside of in a part of Germany with hills and a lot of farmers, not a lot of metal fans, and we always had to take a long drive with a train to next bigger city called Dortmund, and of course there was no internet in the 80s, kids, so remember that. It was always a big adventure to buy stuff. Actually, you collected your pocket money for a couple of months. Then we all went to on the train to Dortmund and went to a record store called Idiots, which is still around. And that was when we first discovered the heavier and extreme stuff. Back then we were like, it's always a big task to go to Dortmund. Why don't we start a band and do music ourselves? So we started actually abusing the school instruments of our gymnasium, where we had no clue really what we were doing. It was just like noise, I would say. The only one who was experienced was Harry, the guitar player, who had classical piano courses. So he was the one who structured the stuff a little bit. But back then there was no, even not a PA for me to sing on. So it was like screaming my lungs out just on the other guys' noise, without amplification. But actually, I think that was probably a good thing to do, because the voice was getting more extreme and was get trained by that. So, but that was a first experience with doing us music, and it was actually because we liked extreme music, but it wasn't easy to get the extreme music back then on the countryside. There was no real record store in our hometown. And it was always like a lot of money to go to a bigger city and buy records. So we started ourselves and said, okay, we need to do extreme music by ourselves. So that was the beginning, I think, 86, 87.
Well, with Dominus, it's the... I think, it all was about to belong somewhere with people who had the same desire and love for death metal or thrash metal or speed metal, just extreme music. And it felt good. It was an underground thing because we felt that that was our thing. and we could be nerdy about it, and we could tape trade, and we could exchange flyers, contacts. And of course, the next step was always, how do we figure out to do a demo? Because those days, you know, of course, you could record it on a tape, record it at the rehearsal room, like the Mighty Dark Throne did it. They still sound good. But, you know, it was still kind of expensive going into a studio for a few days and try to record 4 or 5 songs. But that was the goal at that time. It was a huge thing making a demo, I remember.
And the first goal to us was like to get a demo tape out, and so we could trade stuff, you know. So that was a big goal for us to get a demo, so we could trade with other bands and get music back. And that was like, yeah, I don't know if there was a scene already for death metal when we started, like 87, 88, as we were so lonely in our little hometown, which was like us 5, you know, doing music, 5 punk guys, and then we started to connect probably with a Dortmund scene a bit, you know, when we traded tapes and sent out tapes to bands in that area. And also, of course, we knew some magazines like Slayer Mag from Sweden, where we traded tapes with other bands. Then, you know, that we just like looked at the addresses in the sections where the reviews were, you know. And there was a band from Sweden, we traded a tape with them. There was a band from Florida, we traded stuff with them. So that was the beginning of the scene. But I don't know, I mean, our hometown was too small to have a scene, actually, like a death metal scene. We were the scene back then.
Just imagine making a vinyl, a record, it was almost like impossible. So making a demo was what was the thing. And I remember Jesper, the bass player of Dominus, he actually ended up selling his furnitures. And his wife came home and she said, "Where's our furnitures?" I said, "Yeah, you know, Dominus is going to the studio next week, so I'll get them back." So it was all about, you know, you sold what you have in your apartment to make, you know, it more easy to pay the bill in the studio. So yeah, the goals at that time was definitely to make a demo, tape trade, you know, get some jobs, and of course, next step would see if you can get a record deal.
And of course, when it evolved a little bit more and we got the offer to record an album, of course, then we knew the guys from Century Media, which was only Robert Kampf back then, who was running the label, and also playing in a band called Despair. So we connected with them quite a lot. So we got more connected to the thrash scene in the Ruhrpott, as we say. The bands like Sodom and Creator and stuff like that was the first bands we probably talked to when we were kids, you know. And yeah, Creator was also like a big influence to us on the first recordings too.
Yeah, and I became a fan of Dominus when I think it was, when you released the first 9. Because it had this groove that I loved at that moment, which also Ildes Post has a bit on Submit. And I think I saw you playing live in 96 or something in Aalborg at some Martin, you know, metal fest or something. There was a lot of other Danish bands like Grewe and Mercenary, and you played there. So me and my buddy went all the way from the countryside to watch that show. And I remember because he was 1 year older than me and he got his driving license so we could go. I mean, I was already back then in Raunchy, which is not like a...
that was 92, right?
Yeah. And me and I would say the guitarist and the bass player, we liked death metal, but we also liked a lot of other stuff, and that's why we ended up sounding something else than death metal, I guess. The closest thing I've been to this was that Ildes Post needed a stand-in drummer for a tour where I stepped in. And besides that, this is my first real death metal band.
Well, the German and the Danish scene, if they were connected, I don't even know. You know, the only thing I know that is when I played with my band Morgoth, we always had like Danish bands to support us, which was also like Dominus, for example, Michael's first death metal band in the early 90s. And also Invocator, so that's the connection we have nowadays with this album, you know, like Jacob producing the stuff and I'm playing with Michael in this band. So I don't know if there was a connection. There was also like a scene in Denmark on the west coast, and I think there was a scene on the east coast in the Copenhagen area. But we always played those two cities actually, Esbjerg, where Invocator and Jacob Hansen was located at, and Copenhagen, where Dominus was located at. So that was the death metal bands back then that we knew and we know, and they supported always Morgoth when we played in Denmark for some single weekend shows or something.
It's great. It's feel quite natural. That's where I come from. When the reason why I picked up the guitar ended up being for the sake of playing death metal. So I always knew that one day I would be returning to that style, but it was all a matter of when and getting the inspiration, and more important, have the time to do it, because I've been so extremely busy touring with Volbeat. So there was no time for any side projects, and I have 2 kids, and so you can say that it pretty much happened because of the pandemic, because suddenly there was more time at home to actually sit and think about, what will be the next step for Volbeat. And we ended up writing Servant of the Mind, where we have a track called Becoming, where we used that bass pedal that have this beautiful, ugly, Swedish sound. And that kind of led to a lot of inspiration for Asinhell songs. So playing death metal again, it felt quite natural. It's almost like, it felt like yesterday I just, left the style to do Volbeat. But I'm having a lot of fun with it, and I'm very much inspired. And I always been listening to death metal. I just had a long career now with Volbeat, not playing death metal because Volbeat is more a rock band, but picking up the guitar now and writing death metal songs. It feels right, and I'm having a lot of fun with it.